Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassa. Okay. So this morning, starting to broach the subject, the topic of the daylong. It's only suffering that arises, only suffering that ceases. And this can be a curious and engaging direction to take our minds, to take our contemplations, right? The reality that all the thoughts that arise are suffering. All of the feelings that arise are suffering. All of the habits we have are suffering. Not because they're unpleasant, yeah, not because they don't work in a technical sense. Many of our habits work for the purpose of getting a certain flow to our day, our rhythm in our life, accomplishing certain goals. But suffering because they represent this personalized aspect of suffering, this personalized aspect of us being a person in the world. Yeah. And that's a great equalizer. It's a great simplifier when you think about it. If some of your thoughts were good and some of them were bad, then you would have to kind of pick and choose. Yeah, okay, I've got to hang on to this one, but I can let go of that one. But because all of them represent what your mind is trying to do to overlay itself on reality, all of them can be let go of. And the Buddha says this in the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. It's like whether near or far, subtle or coarse, you know, pleasant, painful or neutral, all should be seen rightly. This is not me. This is not mine. This is not myself. Yeah. This just is. And the framework, the phrase, this only suffering that arises, it shows up most famously in a sutta called the Kachanagota Sutta. And we chanted that this morning during the morning puja. And you're the benefactors. I got kind of frustrated because I tried to find a version of it that didn't have like the kind of etc. where parts of it are chopped out, and I couldn't find it. So our chanting got cut short because it's just at the end it's like etc. Dependent origination, etc., etc. So you're the benefactors. I went and I created a version of it, and it's on the website now. If you go to the menu and you look at chants, you'll see that there's one for the Kachanagota Sutta. And if you go and look at it, it's very good. It's very straightforward. It's short, but it's very hard hitting. And the Buddha and his disciples are basically saying, the world as we know it is shackled between these two dualities. Yeah, that things exist, or that things do not exist, and kind of bounce back and forth between this. And he said, but if you see things arising, you could never say things don't exist. If you saw things ceasing, you could never say they do exist. Yeah. You have to accept that there are things. Yeah. Things are arising, but that they don't last forever, that they cease. And that when they cease, they're really gone. They're really not there. And this helps us sort of create this framework. Like we have this personalized experience of suffering. It's based on how we try to exist and we try to make sense of things and we try to experience particular things in the world. Yeah. And it's really, I mean, ultimately it'd be harmless if not for the fact that just existing means that we can suffer. But how do we not exist? That's one of the great conundrums. And it's actually, as the Buddha is saying, it's like you don't get to choose one or the other. Either I exist and I suffer, or I don't exist and I don't suffer. But we walk the middle way. In some ways, we defeat that duality by finding a path through. And this path through is to understand that things do exist, right? Things are arising, but they are not ourself. They are not us. Yeah. They are just stuff. And so as we meditate and as we look at this experience, this personalized experience of suffering, we know that the thoughts that are happening in our head and the way that we feel about things and the arguments we get into with people in our heads, yeah, they don't represent what's actually happening in reality. Because in the argument in our heads, we're winning. We're making a good point, and the other person is understanding us and they're letting go of their view. But that's not the way it happens in reality, is it? And so this whole process of imagining and feeling and perceiving and have these habits, they're not actually doing anything except perpetuating this feeling that we exist and holding on to things and we want things, yeah, and that all of that has this subtle underlying suffering. And now we can analyze it, and a lot of this part of the path is about seeing it's all the same. And I'll say over and over again that the enlightened mind has no quantity, it only has quality. So you see, it's not that this thought is good and this thought is bad, or I've got 1,500 good thoughts and 100 bad thoughts, so I'm doing really well. There's no measuring it like that. We're actually kind of just experiencing moving through time, and this is wholesome, this is unwholesome, this is wholesome, this is unwholesome. And when things are wholesome, we can just kind of let go, and when things are unwholesome, we get on guard, yeah. And so yeah, we start to have to make changes and start to have to put up precepts and start to get really strict and set determinations about our practice. Why? Because there are unwholesome dhammas present, yeah, and these need to be restrained. We need to guard against them. Things that break the precepts, or things that are based in sensuality or hatred. Even the really subtle things like conceits, like, oh, I'm better than them, or um, I just have to have this to be happy. This is the essence of me as a person. All of these subtle things that create a sense of self. You know, and this is what we're dealing with, and this great equalizer is to see that they're all the same. Yeah, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's pleasant, doesn't matter if it's painful, doesn't matter if it's neutral. It's flowing through the head, and it's trying to identify or label or quantify or possess something in reality. So we know this is suffering. Yeah, and we don't even have to understand at this point why it's suffering. Some of the subtle things like conceit or possessiveness or even love for family, we don't even necessarily have to understand why these things will create suffering. Just accepting that because it's arising and ceasing, it's distracted, it's jittery, it's restless, it's compulsive. That's enough to just kind of like equalize it all and say, I shouldn't cling to any of this. Yeah. It sounds really plausible in my head, like this is really going to make things better, but I just can't believe it. Yeah, I've just got to know it's arising, therefore it's ceasing, therefore it's impermanent, therefore it's not me, no matter what it says. This part of the path is about developing that wisdom in the face of suffering. Yeah? It's about learning how to not cling. But it would be a little bleak if that's all that we were doing, right? We're just, and sometimes this is how practice is portrayed. Yeah, we're sitting there, we're being mindful, and we're watching suffering arise and suffering cease, and trying not to cling to it. And that's the modern Vipassana movement, right? Now it's like, sadly, I kind of go around and I'm like, yes, that is a way of doing things. But then it's like, but back in the days of the Pali Canon, they called that the wrong way. And it's funny that they call it the wrong way. In Pali, that wasn't a problem. Yeah. It's not called the wrong way because it doesn't work. It's called the wrong way because it's really unpleasant. But there is a right way, and the right way is to wake up to this reality for ourselves, not to just out of faith do this practice that we know will help us reduce our clinging, reduce our craving, reduce our suffering, reduce our identification, but to also begin to develop those dhammas, actual cultivation, bhavana of those dhammas which are not suffering. Yeah. And this is at first, it's all about restraint. At first, it's all about triage. We just have to manage the mess that we've inherited, and it's not our fault. We've been doing not Dhamma for all of our existence, and now we've got to start doing Dhamma. So there's going to be a little cleanup. There's going to be a little bit of taking responsibility for what we've been cultivating our whole lives. But at some point, it's going to start to come around where we'll start to like, well, are there any things that we don't have to be on guard about? Are there any wholesome things, stable things, relaxing things? As it turns out, yes. Yeah. And that we can put some energy into cultivating these, and that when we see things in accord with Dhamma, there is no need to be on guard because there is no self present. There is no suffering present. Yeah, there's just life. So is one teacher, I don't even know his name. And I think I was reading one arahant talking about another arahant in Thailand. And is the story that was conveyed is this one teacher was a pretty uninspiring meditator, a kind of delusion type, just kind of muddling through things. And then one day he had this epiphany. And as I said, it's like these Dhamma realizations have this curious quality of having a vocal component. It's funny, but our minds, a lot of things have a vocal component, even if the insight is beyond speech. Because our mind has this vocal component at its basic level, what pops out tends to be an exclamation that we think of in vocal terms. And so what popped out was, oh, Nibbāna is outside. And for the rest of his life, basically, he said, yeah, the Nibbāna element is outside. It's outside the self. And when I heard this, I'm like, well, that's very curious and succinct and very accurate. For me, that comes to sort of portray how I've come to understand things as well. In that I'm also a very deluded guy, and I have a lot of stuff going on in my head, and I've gotten used to the fact that I can't trust any of it. It's all nonsense. It all sounds very plausible, but it's just not. And it's causing me to suffer, yeah. But I've started to wonder, is like, is there anything that is not suffering? And then it's like to go back to the analogy of the meditation timer. Well, he's not suffering, yeah. And the wall's not suffering, the clock is not suffering, the TV's not suffering. And to realize that the only thing suffering here is the sentient being who's misidentifying with things, yeah, that the external realities are just as they are. And this is when we do meditations such as thinking about the four elements or the four satipatthana, paying attention to the body, to the feelings, to the moods, and to thoughts. Even though these things sometimes arise and cease, sometimes they change, they're coming, they're going, they're dying. Nevertheless, they're following principles. They're following natural principles. And because of this, yeah, we can come to understand them as such. One example would be that, say I have this mug, and this mug has something in it. I'm not sure if you can see the liquid there, but there's a tasty liquid in there. And I'm rather attached to the tasty liquid, but I also have this here keyboard. which you might be able to see right here. Now, if I were to invert this glass of tasty liquid over the keyboard would cease to function in the way I want it to. Now, if we look at it in terms of the water element, the liquid element, whether or not this cup is upright or it's inverted, it follows natural principles. It's pure physics, yeah? And so I feel good about it when it's in the cup this way, and I feel bad about it when it's not in the cup because the cup is this way. But it doesn't care at all how I feel about it. And this is the difference between reality and our personalized experience of suffering, and where we can bridge the gap, right? Because if I can come to understand that this liquid in the cup is going to follow natural principles no matter how I feel about it, then I can come to a place of accepting the natural principles which govern the liquid in this glass. And by extension, what it does to things that I want to keep working. Yeah. And I to not get angry at the water for being water, not to get angry at the keyboard for being susceptible to water. And it's just earth element. Yeah. It's just a solid mass, and it's got cracks and crevices that water will just get into, because that's what water does. Flows down to the lowest point. And that's its thing. Why would you get angry at it for doing its thing? But in essence, that's what we've done our whole lives, right? We've identified with earth, water, fire, and wind. We've said they do this because of me. They don't do this because of me. I want this to happen, so let's make it happen. Thinking that we were in charge of these processes. But the whole time, the body has to go through space, and it has to interact with something. And all the time, it's following physical laws, right? And so this is what the Satipatthana, the basis of mindfulness, are pointing towards, directing us towards. Yeah, there's a tangible way to not suffer in this moment. And it doesn't mean necessarily that we sit down and we close our eyes and we breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe in. That we have to reduce our activities to the bare minimum so that we can be mindful with it. It actually means no, we just have to properly conceive of our activities. Yeah, it's at the point where this body is a body in space, at the point where we're okay with the fact that it's following natural principles no matter how it feels. It's a point where we stop suffering. And it can sometimes be hard to identify that point. Or maybe we have a mental concept of this process that says, well, shouldn't there be a bright light? Shouldn't there be like waves of piti and sukha coming up? Like, shouldn't something really powerful happen? But that's maybe putting the cart before the horse. Yeah, that's maybe assuming that our insights or our moments of not suffering can become permanent. Which, if we're paying attention, why would we assume that we could get a permanent understanding of something? Why would we assume we're going to get a permanent perception of non-suffering, of this is just a body? Yeah, we're paying attention to the essence of Satipatthana. It's that no, nothing's permanent. You're gonna see this in accord with reality, and then you're gonna forget. And then you're gonna go back to seeing it in accord with reality, and you're gonna forget. And guess what? All those times that you're forgetting, you're going to suffer. But that's not a problem, because that's what will remind you to start seeing it in accord with reality again. And so I encourage you to it's not a on off pass fail kind of thing, but something to experiment with. Can you walk across a room without suffering? Can you walk across the room and just say, okay, this body is walking across the room. It's being held down by gravity and it's doing its thing. And then you get to the edge of the room and you just see yourself like, okay, now what was that like? When I said it's just a body walking across the room, there was no suffering. So now why is it we get to the doorway and we've got to make a decision? Do I go left or do I go right? Do I go to the fridge or do I go downstairs? Do I talk to the person I know is out there, or do I try to get by them without being seen? Why is it that then suffering starts to arise? Well, yeah, I mean, in some ways it's easy to just send this bag of material across a room and not suffer. It's easy when there's nobody else in the room. And that's the essence of why we incline towards sitting meditation, because we get to be me in a room quietly with everybody else closing their eyes and being quiet as well. It's easy. It's easy to be mindful in those contexts, but we might miss the profundity of the Dhamma when we do it that way. The profundity is not that we could get across the room and not suffer. It's profound when we can leave the room and not suffer. It's profound when we can eat a meal and not suffer. It's profound when we can experience something that we really enjoy and not identify with it. Just be like, okay, that's a pleasant feeling there. Yeah, and it's happening because of that. When we cannot get attached, or we can have an unpleasant feeling and be like, wow, I really don't like that. And it doesn't go any further than that. And I mean, we've been doing this since as long as we've been alive. We eat something and we're like, wow, I really don't like the taste of that. But part of the transition to being an adult is to be able to say, but it's good for me. Ah. And to be able to eat it anyway, right? That's what we've grown to be able to do. We say that is unpleasant but profitable, so I'm going to keep doing it. And to say that this is pleasant but unprofitable, so I'm going to stop doing it. And to make these distinctions, yeah. But now, coming to know Dhamma, coming to know reality, is to extend that principle way further. Yeah. To be able to see that Nibbāna is outside of ourselves. And this is an extension of this phrase. It's only suffering that is arising, only suffering that is ceasing. Is that all the stuff, all of the internal stuff that's arising and ceasing, the thoughts and feelings and habits and all of this stuff is suffering, but that there is a reality external to this which is not suffering. Yeah. And as it is the plot of like every movie and TV show and book produced in America, right? You have a character who starts out at the beginning of the story and they are greedy, antisocial, and selfish, right? And then they have this hero's journey. And at the end, they realize they need their friends and they should learn to be more relaxed and that it's really not about them. Yeah. And you're smiling because you get it, because I'm right. And it's like this story gets repeated again and again and again. Now, why, if it's the same story, is that what gets repeated? Is because that's what's beautiful. Realize we are on our own hero's journey to try to overcome this thing which is the worst thing in existence, the self, the ego. Yeah. But we're all on a personal journey to overcome, because if there was an ego outside, then we could all just fight it and bring it down. But it's not outside. What's outside is a reality that's perfectly good without us. Yeah. It's perfectly free of suffering without us getting involved. But then we have this ego that we carry around with us and nurture that is suffering over what's out there. And so to realize the non-suffering, to realize the third noble truth, is really to wake up to this. Nibbāna is outside. Non-selfishness is outside. Relaxation is outside. The timer's relaxed. The timer's not angry. The timer's not lustful. The timer's not deluded. The Dhamma is staring us in the face every moment of every day. It's saying, you too can just follow natural principles. You don't have to get so spun out over all this. Yeah. It really can be a lot easier. Just let gravity do its thing. Yeah. just let it be. And it's sometimes it'll be good, sometimes it won't be good, sometimes it'll be pleasant, sometimes it'll be unpleasant, but it's never going to be contrary to its causes and conditions. Yeah, it's going to flow according to those, and that we can come to know that. And so what how can this be offered, for the sake of meditation, is to start to explore that. Yeah, what are the things that you can actually accept, what are the things you can actually let go of? And at first it may be something extraordinarily simple, like you might be able to let go of the ticking of the clock. You don't hear it until you start to be all calm and meditative, and then tick, 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 tick. Oh, it's such a loud clock, I should totally buy another clock. But actually, can you accept that? It's not ticking to annoy you. It's not ticking to be the bane of your existence. It's ticking because it has a battery. Yeah. It's just following natural principles. So you learn to accept. And actually, there's something quite beautiful, because it ticks every second, once per second, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. The second might seem long in certain contexts. It might seem short in other contexts. Just like every child in public education knows, it's like an hour can feel like 10 under certain circumstances. Yeah. But it's the same second, regardless of our personalized experience. So to be able to kind of take something, I'm able to say that's going to be the exact same thing. It's only my experience of it that's going to be all over the place, that's going to change constantly. And can I see that? And at some point, can I just drop the part of it that's flip-flopping all over the place and just have just the experience? Yeah? And to try this with other stuff. Be like, we were talking about devotion to wakefulness, and this is as a practice of, just kind of playing with the boundaries of sleep and finding out what rest is by kind of letting go of our fixation on, unconsciousness. You only do this by experimenting here and there, but what you find inevitably is that this practice is not fun at first, but that there's a lot of wisdom to be gained by just accepting that. Yeah, you're going to stay up past your bedtime, and you're going to sit, and it's going to get later and later, and and it's not going to, your mind is going to fight you. But if you just put up with it, then the next morning you're going to find that your mind is angry at you. Why? Because you didn't get as much sleep as you usually get, so it's going to be grumpy. But eventually you're going to start to be like, no, I feel unpleasant because I didn't get a ton of extra sleep last night. This is happening based on natural causes and conditions. This is a natural process. You don't get a nap and you feel grumpy. And so suddenly you start to see your emotion of grumpiness as normal. It's been normalized. It has, its cause and condition. So it's no big deal. So you can feel the underpinnings of being a little tired, and you don't make any suffering over it. You just say, well, okay, yeah. I mean, I won't operate any heavy machinery. Or if I do, I'll warn people I didn't sleep too well, and to kind of stand back. Yeah. And that's all it takes. In reality, probably 50% of the people here didn't have a great night's sleep. that's that's the human reality. Yeah. But what percentage are like um handicapping themselves in different ways, saying, I didn't get a good night's sleep, so I should get compensation? And that at some point you just say, no, I didn't get sleep, so I'm gonna talk in a slurred way. I'm going to be a little scattered. I might forget some of my appointments. That's what happens when I don't get enough sleep. And to say that this is a natural principle, there's no ego to it. A plus B equals C. Yeah. And that this is the satipatthana. Yeah, it's basically saying, well, this thing conditions this thing, and therefore there's this mood. And that when you can say that, there's no self, there's no ego. Yeah. It's a very bizarre thing because it sounds like you still exist, right? It sounds like you're still there. It sounds like you're still doing stuff. You have activities and you have like experiences, you have feelings, you're making plans, you're going to work, and yet at the same time you're not suffering. And why is that? And it turns out because the not suffering is just simply getting outside of yourself. And Nibbāna is out there. It's always out there. Yeah. It's a simple step, but one that we have to figure out how to take on our own. Yeah. And it's not an all or nothing thing. Figure out a way how to take it in a small context. And then you'll be able to do that repeatedly. And when you can do that repeatedly, maybe some of the bigger important letting goes, like around food, around sleep, around relationships, around all sorts of things will start to occur. And you realize that, not suffering is not something that you do. It's just about letting go of something you've been doing that wasn't working. You just letting things be as they are. Okay. So now we've got the rest of the afternoon for sitting and walking. Now I'm going to leave it kind of open since we're not in the same room. We don't need to keep to any particular schedule, but let's say because schedules can be nice for the mind. Let's say that if you're going to change posture, try to do it on the half hour. Yeah. And that can help you decide. So at the half hour, you like, do I want to keep sitting? Want to do some walking meditation? Do I want to do some standing meditation? Whichever one we choose, try to stick with it for at least half an hour. And let's have a good afternoon of practice. So we'll come back together at 5 p.m. It's about 2.5 hours. Yeah.